So the high school season is finally started. All your hard work is paid off. You've hopefully made the team at this point. Now we transition into actually playing the game of baseball, playing to win, playing at a high school level where everything matters, as we like to say. We transition through the offseason where a lot of cage work, a lot of control work, a lot of batting cage work. Swings look a certain way. They work a certain way against pitching machines during batting practice. Maybe on the indoor mounds, you're able to pitch a certain way, throw strikes correctly. Let's face it, it's a lot easier. There's no batter in there. Now that the high school season started, the one thing that always astonishes me up in New England is how short and compacted the high school season can be. Most of us are going to get started around April 7th or 8th for regular season games. A lot of your scrimmage games are going to get canceled either to field conditions or weather conditions. During the season, you may run into some rain, you may run into some field conditions or field issues, and what that translates into is that the schedule gets compacted. So your 20 games may be played in a month, maybe 5 weeks, and everything has to be ready to start playoffs. The reason we bring up this subject is when you're trying to do your assessment as a player, you may only play once a week, especially if you're not in the starting lineup. Teams have to win, teams have to get multiple guys in. So if if you could be 5 games into the season and have 6 at-bats, I don't know that 6 at-bats could constitute being hot or having a slump, and there's not always the type of communication, meaning the coaches don't always know who's going to play and when. So as a player, you may play the first game and go 1 for 3. Your name's not in the lineup the next day. You're wondering, did you do something wrong? Should you have done something different? And then it builds on you day after day after day. And then maybe you do get that shot to go in and you're 0 for 3. Or you make an error. Or you get picked off. Then you're not in the lineup the next day. The difference between the high school and the summer, besides all the obvious things, is that in the summertime you generally get a strong dose of games and at-bats, especially in select baseball. So you may get 10, 15 at-bats over the course of a weekend. And very rarely you're struggling for playing time. And for some of you younger players, this may be the first time ever that you weren't in the starting lineup or had to platoon or had to work to get your time or maybe just get in as a defensive replacement. There's a certain art to what we call being a part-time player. Not everyone can do it, especially if you haven't trained for it before. But at this point, hopefully your high school season's going well, and it's one of those things where it's still a work in progress, but it's where you're at for right now. So now you're in the high school season, and suddenly something unfortunate happens. If you're a pitcher, suddenly the elbow starts to hurt. The shoulder starts to hurt. If you're a hitter, maybe you get hit by a pitch. Maybe you have blisters. Maybe you sprain your ankle. This is all the types of things that us players have to deal with up here, especially in the Northeast. And the reason why I say especially the Northeast, it's a lot colder when you start the season. The field conditions are less than perfect. It's a lot easier to slip on the banana peel, as we say, and get a real bad injury if the field conditions aren't ready. But playing in the cold weather, a lot of times it's tougher to get loose. It's easier to pull a hamstring. It's easier to tweak an arm injury or a nagging injury. And the one thing that I found from talking to high school players is it's something that can be very scary to them. Meaning that pitcher goes out and pitches, the next day his elbow's sore. Or you'll hear a player say, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel perfect. And we don't know how to manage that. The common phrase you'll hear, are you hurt, are you injured? That's not always as easy to figure out. I have parents contacting me constantly about player injuries, nagging injuries, and they'll say to me, at the end, what do you think? And I'll say the same thing. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. There are common sorenesses that you come up with in baseball, and I have a lot of parents and players that they don't want to get checked out because they don't want any bad news. So that's something we definitely don't recommend. It's always better to get a diagnosis. Yes, in the short high school season, as we've already mentioned, to be down 2 to 3 weeks, yeah, that can seem like a lot and a real tough blow, especially if the season's just getting started. You can't think of it as I'm missing half my season, especially, and we've gone over this multiple times in many of our episodes, you have high school baseball, you have summer baseball, you have fall baseball, you have showcase events in between. You can't look at it as, the drawback of the short term, because what I'm really concerned with is that player goes, the injury's undiagnosed, or he wants to hide the injury, minimize the injury, something really bad happens, now you're out a year or longer. So I like to say the injury timeline has nothing to do with your baseball timeline. What do I mean by that? Player has a sore arm and the playoffs start in 10 days. Well, suddenly his rehab has him slated to be back in 10 days. Well, if your doctor tells you not to pick up a ball for 2 weeks, then you don't pick up a ball for 2 weeks. You're not weighing the diagnosis. Well, the doctor said not to throw for 2 weeks, but the championship game's in 10 days. It's just not wise to do. There's a reason why they're having guys do their downtime. And it can be mental just as much as physical. Like, most players have had to deal with some form of injury, and it's never a good time to be hurt. The only thing I recommend to players is get an honest diagnosis from a medical professional on what's going on with your situation. Follow the rehab to the T as best you can. And unfortunately, it's not always cut and dry. They may tell you you're going to be down for 2 weeks and you go back in for a checkup and you're going to miss another 2 weeks, or maybe things are getting worse, or maybe they start to get better, then they get worse. But as a player, no one knows your body better than you, but it's always best to be proactive, always best to get it checked out by a professional. And don't think of things in the short term, think of things in the long term. When I hear injuries with guys, my thought is, well, hey, it could always be worse. You look at Major League Baseball, college baseball, players get hurt all the time. How you manage those injuries, part of who you are as a player. But for the especially the younger players out there, a lot of guys are still growing. It's not uncommon that you're going to get hurt. Doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It's the management and how you handle the situation going forward is most likely what's going to dictate the rest of your season and years to come. If you enjoyed the video, please let us know by leaving a like. If you have a question you'd like answered, please leave it below in the comment section. If you want to catch more of this content, make sure you follow or subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. Thank you. See you next week.